holding down page Mem Dalid. Turn off your, mute yourself, please. And we're about 7 lines from the bottom where it says, Vihine, after the period, Vihine bir mashal zeh. No, sorry. Way before. First, we're going to learn the mashal. The mashal is Vahu, a behekdim. It's 7 lines from the top. From the beginning of Mem Dalid, page Mem Dalid, the first word on the line is Vahu. Vahu behekdim. Let's continue. Vahu, to understand this concept that the primary issue is Maisa's action even greater than love and fear for God, as we'll explain soon later. Vahu bahagdim loshna yenuka. The Alter Rebbe brings a quote from the Yenuka. In the Zohar HaKodesh, there's a famous Yenuka. By the way, the Yenuka is the son of Rabbi Namuna Saba. There was a sage named Rabbi Namuna Saba, and his son is referred to as Yenuka. So it says, the Yenuka says, Bezoya Pashas Bolok al Posuk, on the verse, quote, HaChocham Einav Beroshai. The wise person, his eyes is in his head. Now, so the Zohar asks, where else is a person's eyes? Of course they're in the head. So what's the pasuk saying? Duh, of course. Huli. Ella, so answers the Zohar HaKodesh, Kro hochi hu. Vadai detnan. In other words, this is the meaning in the verse, surely. We learned, Lo Yahach bar Nasha begilui dereisha arba amis. The Zohar HaKodesh says a person should not walk, a yid should not walk 4 cubits without a covering on his head, which, by the way, is one of the sources for, or the source for, not walking 4 cubits without a yarmulke, a kippah. My time. But why? What's the reason? The Shechinta Shari al Reisha, the Shechina rests on a person's head. V'chol chochem einohi imilui, and every wise person, his eyes and his speech, milui is speech, bereishe his mouth, bereishe is in his head. Inun inun, they are in his head. Behahu desharia v'kaim al reishe, and that's how the Shechina rests on the head. V'kad enu tamon leninda. And when the eyes express the light of the neshama, that's of the Shechina, that's al reishay, it's like similar to a candle and to a wick and oil. Itzrach lemishcha. You need to have oil. In order for a candle, he brings a mashal, the Zohar, the Yenuka. In order for a candle, a wick to light, to catch on fire, it needs oil. And without the oil, the fire isn't become part of the wick. It doesn't catch on fire. Says the Zohar HaKodesh, says the Yenuka, begin so too, the gufa de barnash, the body of a person, iu psila, that's analogous to the wick. Unahoira, and a light, adlik le'ela, is lit on the body, on the guf. That means the neshama. The neshama is lit in the guf, because the guf is the receptacle and the vessel to hold the light of the neshama. Shloima Malka and Shloima HaMelech, King Solomon, Tzavech v'Omar, he shouted like it. He said, "V'shemen al reishcha al yechsa." There's another pasuk, and Shloima says, "Oil on your head do not diminish." In other words, if you don't have oil, the wick won't catch on fire. You must have oil. The honohira, the bereisha, itzrach lemishcha, because the light that's on the head requires oil. V'inan, and what is oil? What is the moral, the nimshal of the oil? Says the Zohar, this is all part of the same Zohar. Uvdin tovin, these are good deeds. Va'aldo, and this is what the verse means, ha'chocham einav b'roshei, that the wise person, his eyes are on his head, ad kan l'shoynei. Now I'm going to explain now this section of Zohar because it's very important. The Zohar is saying like this. Just as, why can't a wick catch on fire without oil? You know why? Hevra, you know why? Because it's too thick. The oil makes it possible for the wick to catch on fire better. So in other words, what we see is that in order for the Shekhinah, so too in the moral, in order for the Shekhinah to be on a person, that should be revealed in a Jew, the person's body, their guf, needs to be refined. How is the guf refined? Says the Zohar HaKodesh, not through loving and fearing God, but through uvdin tovin, through good deeds. Like Moshe said yesterday, and Hillel supported it, anshe maaseh, right? Action. Now why? You would think that the neshama, the soul, is holy enough, Moshe, it's holy enough to be the receptacle for God's Shekhinah to be on the person. And we say, and the Zohar doesn't say that. The Zohar says it needs, the neshama, the soul needs to do good deeds, uvdin tovin. And if it doesn't do good deeds, even though it's the neshama and the gewaldige soul, Shekhinah is not resting al reishei. It's a phenomenal piece of Zohar. And it's a perplexing one. And the Alter Rebbe is tackling it here in Tanya. Because he seeks to explain the virtue of Maaseh over Ava and Yira. And this is a fundamental chapter in Tanya Isser to explain this idea. All the shaking and all the love and all the fear of the neshama pales in comparison to one time putting on tefillin. The story, there was a chassid, Menashe, there was a chassid, a Chabad chassid, and a very big chassid. His name was, oh my gosh, my memory is really, the Paltova Rav, he was called the Rav of Paltova. Rabbi Yaakov Mordechai Bezipalov was his name. And he was a Rav in Paltova. And he was a Chavrusa for a while of the Rebbe Rashab. So you can imagine what kind of great mind and person he was. And I heard from someone who remembered him when he would come to the Rashab. So this is a real story. At the end of his life, the doctors told him shortly, you're going to pass away, whatever. He was very ill. So he asked them, this is the way the story goes. So don't ask me, questions because I don't have all the answers. How, what, when. I'm just repeating. I know we have a doctor here, so I have to make that preface because you're going to hear it and it doesn't sound so medically.
No kashas and mices.
Yeah, no kashas and mices. So this is the story. So he asked, why am I so sick? What happened over here? So they said, 30 years, the last 30 years, you haven't been eating properly because of your avoda of iskafia, of holding yourself back from taivas of food, whatever. And you can imagine how much food they had then. But whatever it is, you were very much into the avoda of iskafia. And you didn't sleep on a normal bed. And again, what's a normal bed? So, whatever it was in Russia in 1900, 1910, whatever it was. And you hurt your body. Your iskafia that you did to develop more love and offer Hashem, and that should be your only focus and not Gashmias, right? Hurt you. the gashmis had hurt you, and you're very sick, from not eating and sleeping and everything else properly. And when he heard that, Rabbi Yaakov Motel Paltova said, Rabbi Yaakov Mordechai said, if I knew that my 30 years of iskafia would make me pass on so that the next day I couldn't put on tefillin, I wouldn't do it. Because one day putting on tefillin is worth more than 30 years of iskafia. I mean, it's a tremendous insight into the Chabad, Chosid, and Chabad approach, and this is what it says here in Tanya. All the iskafia, all the Ava and Yira, and you're talking real Ava and Yira, real love and awe for Hashem. It pales in comparison to one time putting on tefillin. Uvdin tovin. That's what the Zohar says. Now, of course, when Hasidim heard the story that I just told you, they said, who is the type of Jew that can make such a statement and mean it? Only someone who dies because he did 30 years of iskafia. Otherwise, they're a bluffer. They don't really feel the value of putting on tefillin one more day. But that's a sidebar for a Farbrengen, That's like, do I really mean it or do I not really mean it? But the Nekuda, how it's relevant, I'm sharing that story because we're learning here in Tanya, is Uvdin Tovin. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to explain it. Let's go further. V'hinei bir moshul zeh, to explain this moshul, shehimshul eira shchina, that the light of the shchina has been compared lo'eira ner to the light of a candle, she'eina meir v'nechaz b'psila, which doesn't catch on fire to the wick. Beli shemen, unless you have oil. Without oil, so too in the moral. V'kach ein hashchina sheire al gufa adam. The shchina will not dwell on the body of a person. Shenimshel psila, the body of the person, which is could be compared to the wick. Elai de ma'asim tovim dafke. The Alter Rebbe spells it out only specifically through doing good deeds. And look at the next words. V'loi dai loi b'nishmosoi, and it's not adequate enough to tell me that you have a neshama, and your neshama is on a high with love and fear, and this neshama is chelik elikami ma'al. Why is that not adequate? In other words, why must I have oil, Isser? That's the question. Why can't the wick catch on fire directly from the fire without the oil? Because the goof is like the oil to the wick. Everyone who can understand. You know why it is. Nishmas ha'adam, when he says here a heavy line. Afilu tzaddik gomer, the soul of a person, and even the soul of a complete tzaddik. Oived Hashem b'yireh v'yava, who serves God with awe and love. B'tainugim, with a love of delights and pleasure. He gets delight and pleasure from serving God. Afal pikein, nevertheless. Eina b'teileh b'mtzias legamri, it's not completely annulled. Its existence is not annulled. Libotel v'likolol, to be absorbed and included. Top of page 88. But Hashem mamish, in the light of God in actuality, liyois, to become lachodim u'michodim, united and one, b'yichud gomer, with complete unity, rather hudavar b'fnei atzmai, it remains separate, yorei Hashem v'yavoy, fearing God and loving God. The Alter Rebbe here has wiped away the classical understanding of a tzaddik, loving and fearing God. The Alter Rebbe says, if it all comes from the neshama of the person and the eye of the person, through the neshama, there's still not complete unity. There is love for God, there's fear for God, but it's coming from a mitziyut. It's coming from an existence. It's an existence that loves and fears God. such a, you tell this to any Ben Torah, they'll flip out. I mean, what do you mean? He's a tzaddik, he's a godel, he's a rav, he loves God, he fears God. The Alter Rebbe is making a distinction here. And the Alter Rebbe says, yes, he has love for God, and he has fear for God. But there is a he who has the love and fear for God. There is some mitziyut that's not completely nullified to Hashem. And you know why? Because the soul is already defined. Now, you hear this, Nekuda? The neshama has a definition. Its abode is God. Its comfort zone is God. Therefore, the neshama is already limited. So if you're telling me that the love and fear of Hashem, even by a tzaddik, comes from the soul perspective, it's very nice and very special, and halavai, we should have that. But at the end of the day, that's not what Hashem wants. Hashem wants something greater. Put tefillin on one time. Put on a mezuzah. Go visit someone. That act is totally selfless. So if Taka, listen to this, if Taka you're putting on tefillin because, I'm going to say, you want to help the soldiers, that's like the neshama. It's very good, but it's not the ultimate. You don't put tefillin on because you want to help the soldiers. You put tefillin on because that's God's will. Finished. The fact that it'll help the soldiers, halavai, amen, yes. But that's not why you put tefillin on. That's not why you go and help a Jew. And the difference is a very slight difference. But in philosophy, in ideology, it's a major difference. It's the difference between being one with God or not being one with God, but being an adjunct to God. And again, I say, halavai, we would be an adjunct to God, but the Alter Rebbe's nekuda is, he wants to bring out to us why the Zohar HaKadosh says that dafke uvdin tov and good deeds is analogous to the oil that makes the light come. In other words, the Shechina will not be sharia. The Shechina will not rest only because of the neshama. That's what we just learned now. It's a very, very important nekuda. What time is it now? I don't have a watch.
3:12.
Okay, another few minutes.
3:12.
Okay, thank you. Mashenkin ha-mitzvahs, conversely, our mitzvahs u'maisim toivim, shehein ritzoyni yizborich, we're talking about doing good deeds that are God's will. V'ritzoyni yizborich u'moker achayim l'chol ha'olam es v'abruyim. And Hashem's will is the source of life for all worlds and all creatures. God descends upon them through many constrictions upon him and concealment of the continents of God's will. And God descends levels until he's able to create yesh mi'ayim ex nilo, v'dover nifrid b'fnei atzmei, something that's created that seems to be totally separate from God, v'lo yibotlu b'metzias kanal, and they won't be annulled in their existence to God. Mashenkin, conversely, mitzvos, shehem pnimius ritzoyni yizborich, which are the will of God, and the inner will of God, v'ein shum hester ponim klal, and there is no concealment of God's countenance, the vitality within them is not davar nifra b'fnei atzmei klal, a separate existence on its own. Ella, rather, hu miyuchad v'nichlu b'ritzoyni yizborach, it's united, v'hoyel achod mamish b'yichud gom, and it becomes one. So the Alter Rebbe basically in this section makes a difference and says, what's the difference between good deeds, mitzvahs? It's not a good translation, but I'm saying a good deed that's also a mitzvah versus the creation of the world, which is God's will. So the Alter Rebbe says, yes, but the creation of the world comes through tzimtzumim, contractions, restrictions. So the light is not clear. It's like covered and it becomes more dim and more dim, the energy of a God. But in mitzvahs, as we learned in chapter 23 in Tanya, the Ratzon Hashem is the mitzvah itself. The tefillin itself, this is what Hashem wants. It's the highest form of godliness is the mitzvah because the commander gave us a commandment. Yes, Abisha.
It's actually very close to what we just learned this morning in Chitas, in Tanya, and that was at the end of letter 29.
Right.
About the
Right. Okay, Chevra, we'll stop here and tomorrow we'll continue with Shem. Have a great day, everyone. Be safe. And Am Yisrael Chai, and we're going to beat this negativity and with Simcha. Sei gesund. Take care.
Okay,